I'm no good at taking good advice, and I'm self-careless, so don't tell me twice that lately I've been so stuck in my head that I forget just about everything my therapist said. Maybe I'm self-helpless, maybe I'm self-helpless. Maybe I'm self-helpless. Maybe we are all self-helpless.
Hey everyone, welcome to Self-Helpless. I'm Delanie Fischer, and today I'm chatting with Jessica Gemme, who was an educator in a variety of ways for several years as a substitute, a para or teacher's aide, running her own classroom, teaching everything from history to computer science, helping kids with special needs, teaching in a public inner city school to small private schools, and she's sharing about the moment she hit major burnout. So much so that she left her classroom one day and went straight to the hospital because she thought she was having a heart attack. Here's what I love so much about this episode. Because Jessica is a former educator, she was able to be incredibly honest about her experience. This is about as unfiltered as you can get, and I'm beyond appreciative of her willingness to share with us in this way. I know a lot of current educators are not able to put certain things out there, understandably. So, this is a really unique perspective you might not always be able to get in a public setting, especially for those of you who want to work in education, those of you who already work in education and might be feeling a little lonely about it, those of you who feel like you're struggling with the workload or other demands of your position, or if you're simply experiencing burnout in life or work in general. Just a reminder, this is Jessica's personal experience and is not meant to represent the education system as a whole. So, some of the specifics that she got into about her experience, the rewards and challenges of being considered the cool teacher among the kids, tips for dealing with difficult behaviors in the classroom, what it felt like to go through emergency trainings, how stressors in her home life amplified the intensity she felt around her job, the guilt she felt about leaving, her perspective on hustle culture, things that helped her post burnout, and what her goals are today. And just a heads up, some of the things that Jessica shares might be upsetting. She talks about the safety of schools in America for students, teachers, and administration. But I also think it's important to hear this stuff. And, this is the reality that they deal with. But obviously, use discretion about whether you think this episode is right for you at this time. Maybe you could just give us a little bit of a snapshot. You were a teacher, you hit some burnout, and maybe kind of where you're at now, whatever you want to share. And then I have a lot of questions for you about all of that.
Great. Well, first, I just want to say, I'm not here to do like an expose on the education department or any kind of
Of course.
administration or anything like that. Like, I totally get that it's a bureaucracy and there's, a ton of red tape and bullshit. And there are a ton of people who would do more if they could.
Yes,
I don't want to point fingers at anybody. This is just my experience and my opinion based on my experience.
absolutely.
I was a terrible student growing up, like middle school and high school. I just did not do well. I got in trouble a lot. I didn't really care about it. It wasn't something in my family that was like, all right, get good grades and go to college. Like we didn't that wasn't encouraged. It was like graduate and get a job. And
Yeah.
college was kind of like for people who had money,
Mm.
and that was not us. So I graduated, got a job, worked for 5 years as a secretary, and within that time, I reconnected with a friend from high school, and she was like, "You got to go to college," and she had like all this forethought, and I just had never had forethought.
Mm.
Um, and I did. I did all the things, and I majored in culinary. I
Oh,
graduated like the top of my class.
wow.
Yes, and started cooking in restaurants, and I was like, this sucks. So I stopped doing that. I was like waitressing, and then I had my son. And once I had him, I don't know, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go back to school. I'm gonna go to college. I'm gonna become a teacher because teaching was kind of one of those things that I always thought about, like in the back of my mind. Like when I was a kid, I would set up all my stuffed animals and like give them all report cards and stuff like that. And it was just kind of like one of those things, but I was like, I could never do that. I could never be, that could never be me. So it was kind
Mhm.
of just not an option. Yeah. And then I don't know, I had my son and I was like, you know what? I'm doing it. I can do this. I'm going to go for it.
Yeah.
So I did all the things again, financial aid, student loans. I started at community college and then I transferred to state university, graduated top of my class. And
Wow, I'm seeing a
yeah,
pattern here.
I know. And I substituted for a year, and that wasn't bad. But after that, I left and I got a job as a para. It's just like a fancy way of saying teacher's aide.
Okay.
Um, it was like kids on the spectrum. It was special needs,
Mhm.
and that was cool because some of them would like go out for a certain subject, and I would go out with them and just be in the classroom with them to kind of help assist them.
Sure.
Um, and that was a cool job. The thing about being a para, though, is you don't always get all the same information that the teachers get.
Oh,
Um, Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, because a lot of it's like legal documents, individual education plan that is like a
okay.
legal document between the families and the schools.
Gotcha, so it's a lot of confidentiality and stuff like that, I'd
Yeah.
imagine?
So
Okay.
there's some confidentiality in that. So yeah, as a para, you don't always get to see all that. You don't get to be in all the meetings and know like kind of what's going on, even though you're the person that's with the student all day,
Right.
every
Oh,
day. So it's like,
interesting.
yeah, it's kind of like this weird thing there. And then the thing about being a para too, in a lot of schools, is you get pulled from doing your job to do fill other unfilled positions. So if they don't have
Oh,
enough subs
boy.
that day, you're going to get pulled and sub a class or two and not get paid anymore for that. So that is like a tricky part of being a para, is like they just kind of put you where they need you and you're like, all right, but I've never been trained to work with a student with this, level of
Yeah,
need.
yeah.
So it can be tough.
That seems like that would have a lot of anxiety attached to it and
Yes.
hard to kind of feel grounded, I would imagine.
I'm licensed to teach history,
Yeah.
um, which is a tough position to find because there's no MCAS, which is like our state testing, like
Yeah.
our state tests. The kids have to pass those in order to graduate. There's no test for history. So a lot of
Oh.
people like to stay as history teachers or be history teachers because those other teachers, like science, math, English, they have a lot of pressure to teach to those tests and they get evaluated based on the student scores.
Oh, I
Yeah.
did not know that. My
Yeah.
gosh.
It's very high stakes test. These kids they can't graduate unless they pass, which
Yeah.
is crazy because some kids just don't test well.
Right, right.
They don't. It's like saying that you're going to have a class for like teaching voice lessons and being like, okay, well, if you can't sing like, Whitney Houston in four
Right.
years, then
And that's somehow the teacher's fault in a you know what I mean? Like,
right,
I mean, some
right.
people just don't have that skill set either. Like, there's some things that you can't teach certain things, and that's okay. Like, everybody's different. If certain students don't pass a class and that falls back on the teacher, doesn't that incentivize the teachers to be like, you know what? I just have to try to figure out how to pass this kid because it makes it harder for them, right? Like I'd imagine there's got to be like evaluations or their job is at stake. So, I mean, how do you regulate something like that? That just seems really like an unfair situation for everybody.
Yeah, you can't. You can't
Yeah,
regulate it. It's like I can give you all the tools and the information, but some kids just struggle,
right,
academically. Some kids just don't care. Yeah, it shouldn't be a reflection of the teacher because you
right,
can't control that. You're going to get, a range of students in your
right,
classes. So it's another thing in teaching that's like out of your control, yet you're responsible for it and you get judged for it.
right,
And
right. Yeah, it's a lot of
yeah.
pressure.
Yeah. So the history teaching jobs tend to not be available. There's not a lot of availability, and people like to retire in those positions. So you kind of just take what you can get. That's why I
Yeah.
did the subbing and the para, because there's no, like, I would have applied for a history position, but there are none. So at the end of that para job, I took a position as a long term sub because there was a history teacher going out for surgery. That was pretty cool. It was like the first time I had my own classroom. I was working off her lesson plans, so it was like a little tricky to try to figure out, but it was cool because she had like done the plans for me because
Yeah.
that can be part of the overwhelm of being a teacher is like you have to come up with a lesson plan for every class for every day.
Right.
So if you're teaching 3 or 4 sections of history, you're coming up with 3 or 4 lesson plans a day, every day.
Oh my gosh.
And some
Yeah.
schools like require you to submit those lesson plans in the beginning of the week. So it's like you have to know what you're doing for every single class all week long and have it all, plotted out and handed
Yeah.
in. It's a lot.
Yeah, I know from my family, it's like, yeah, you kind of hear about a teacher's schedule, like, oh, wow, they get out kind of at a decent hour and then they have summers off. But no, the lesson planning, the grading, all of that work that happens on nights and weekends and summer prep, it's so much. And then working like in between classes or right after school or right before school. So, how did you kind of manage that stuff? Did anything help you with that?
Honestly, there were some times where I was teaching myself the night before to
Yeah,
go in and teach them because it's like you go to college and you major in history. It's not like I
right,
learned every single thing that ever happened in history and I
right,
was like,
right,
got it. You know what I mean?
right.
Like, I was like, okay, I got to teach these kids about the Civil War. Never took a Civil War class in college. Don't really know much about it. Like, got to
Wow,
study
yes.
and like teach myself so I can know what I'm talking about. It is kind of like discouraging when you hear people talk about like, oh, well, you have the summers off. It's like, no, I don't because I'm
Right.
already like freaking out about next year trying to plan,
Right.
and like get ahead of the schedule there.
Was it ever nerve-wracking, like, "Oh gosh, I hope they don't ask me a question that I don't know the answer,"
Yes.
or like, "Hey,
Yes.
I gotta get back to you, let me tell you tomorrow," or like, ho
Yes.
how do you handle
That's a
something like
that's a
that?
great question. You should write a one-page paper on that and come in tomorrow and present it to the class.
Hot tip for teachers.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah, and, like, if you're teaching, like, an honors class or something, like, sometimes those kids are smarter than you, they know more than you. Yeah, it's
Right.
definitely like, "Oh my god, they're gonna know I don't know."
Yeah.
Like, in the beginning, I think if you teach something, any subject, but if you teach for 10, 15 years, eventually you're gonna get pretty comfortable with the material, but when you're starting out,
Right.
it's tough because kids aren't stupid, they know.
Right. And of course, it's
So
like, it's fine to not know everything, right? Like, I'm just like, "Oh, I actually don't know the exact answer, and I don't wanna give you any misinformation, so let me look into it, and I'll tell you tomorrow." Like, people also should not expect teachers to know everything about everything. That is so way too much pressure, unrealistic, nobody does. So, you were teaching history as, like, the long-term sub, and what happened from there?
I applied at an inner city middle school. They called and they were like, we have somebody else that we want to do the humanities class, but we really like you and we have this research and technology class. Would you be willing to teach it? It's new, there's no curriculum, pretty much you can do whatever you want.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like, I don't know anything about technology. Terrible with technology, but I know how to do research and,
Yeah.
I'm sure I can figure it out. So 2 days before school started, I got my rosters for my classes. And that's when I realized that I wasn't just going to have 5 classes a day. I was going to have 5 different classes a day on a 3-day cycle. So I was going to have a total of 15 different classes.
Oh my gosh.
And I had 419 students.
Oh my gosh, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Holy shit.
So now we touched on IEPs before, which is like that legal document. So that can include anything from preferred seating if they have trouble seeing, if they have trouble hearing. It could be like text to audio. It could be testing. They have to leave the room and test somewhere separate.
Yeah.
It could be got to make sure they have their glasses on. It could be social emotional stuff, watching out for anxiety, watching out for relations with other kids. It could be executive functioning stuff, keeping organized, keeping a planner, stuff
Mm.
like that. So it can be a range of all of these things that
Wow.
you have to know about each student because this is a legal document, and if you're not doing the things,
Oh
it's
my
not good.
gosh.
So now I have 419 students and probably like, I don't know, 70 IEPs with that many kids.
Oh
Um,
my gosh.
So now I have to like know who these kids are and make sure they're getting the accommodations that are required by the state. How do you do that?
How do
Honestly.
you give individual attention that is needed, but also teach the class as a whole and keep everybody on track kind of at the same rate so they can all pass the class at the same time? I mean, was there a moment where it really hit you how much pressure you were under as a teacher? Would you say that was the moment?
Yeah, so when I got those rosters and I realized what I was in for, it was like, holy shit. But then
Yeah.
my first day of school was really the moment where I was like, can I fucking do this?
Yeah.
Because I had sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. So sixth in the morning, seventh in the middle of the day, eighth grade at the end of the day. When my eighth grade class came in, my first eighth grade class, it's probably like 10 minutes into class. Day's going okay. It's hectic. A lot of kids. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to keep everybody organized. I made like a color system where every class was like a color. And so, anyway, I get to this class, like my fourth class of the day. And about 10 minutes in, get a knock on the door, open the door. It's one of the counselors. She's got a student with her. And he comes in. She's like, yeah, him and that kid are having problems together, like with each other. So if you see them start throwing up gang signs, pick up your phone and dial blah 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 and blah 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 blah. And I'm like,
Oh boy.
turns around and leaves, and I'm like, what number did she say to call? Like,
Oh, yeah.
what what? So we did have students and parents that were gang affiliated. And that's not to say at all that they were bad people, because I don't feel that way. I think that people do what they have to do to survive every day. And I honestly had nothing but positive interactions with parents when I worked in inner city. And the only reason why I even mention the gang affiliation thing is just to kind of help illustrate that reality that we were kind of all living in.
Right.
I mean, obviously, the parents and the students are living in it first and foremost. We did have a student that came through our middle school, but was in the high school. At the time, it was like a year or two before I started at the middle school, who was shot and killed off the bus, like
Oh my
right
god.
after school.
Oh,
So
God.
um, it was definitely like a harsh reality for the families.
Right.
But it was also something like us as teachers and the administration had to be aware of. There were certain kids that couldn't be around each other. We had to be aware of that and vigilant. So that was kind of like, yeah, this is going to be a lot. Like, I wanted to work with inner city kids. That was my whole deal when I decided to be a teacher, because I didn't go to inner city schools, but I was a bad student and I wanted to work with kids who didn't love school because I didn't love school. So I was like, I can totally connect with these kids. Like, I get it. I was like not into this shit either. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And then like I got there and then that happens on the first day and I'm like, "Oh my god, like this is a lot more than I bargained for."
Right,
So
right.
that day, at the end of the day, when everybody left, I was like bawling my eyes out in my classroom. And one of my vice principals came in. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I don't know. It's a lot. And she was like, well, I think you can, but if you don't think you can, like, that's okay. I just was like, all right, you got to dig deep. And I just have to push through and just do it. Like, you talk the talk, now walk the walk. And like, part of me is like really glad that I did that because I got to experience it and I wouldn't have otherwise. But I think that was like part of the problem too, was like that for so long I was like, just push through, just push through, just get through it. You can get through it, and not
Mm,
like, okay, what's really going on here? Like, what are we really dealing with? What are we really feeling? Is this sustainable? Is this
right.
appropriate, for me? Sometimes not pushing through is better.
And it's also makes you think, well, where did I learn this whole I have to push through my whole life from? And what about enjoying it? Like
Yeah.
why isn't that a focus as well?
I just think we're all living in like this hustle culture and
Yeah,
it's such bullshit. It's just such
right,
bullshit. I don't know why we're here. I don't know the meaning of life, but I don't think that's it. I don't think
right.
it's just busting your ass and pushing through and hustling, and you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and just making as much money as you can to buy as much shit as you can to, that's just not it for me. I don't think that's why we're here.
Yeah.
So it was tough. Like, I had a kid spit on my floor right in front of me, and I was like, "Why did you do that?" And he's like, "What do you mean? I didn't do that. No, I didn't do that." And I'm like, "I just watched you spit on my floor." But the kids were like so mushy and lovey. I can't even tell you how many hugs a day I got. Just
Can you share anything that the kids told you or parents told you or any kind of feedback you got throughout your time working with all those kids?
I have like a thing of like letters that kids have given me. Still talk to a couple of the girls that I had that
That's
have
so
gone on and
sweet.
graduated high school and stuff now, and they still text me and keep in touch. One of them just had a baby. But even like my principal was like, you know, we need you. We need you here. You're like you're one of the good ones. It was different. It was different. And I've gone back like since and worked in other communities with different
Yeah.
types of kids, and it's just not like that. Like, yeah, these kids are tough and their behaviors can be very challenging sometimes, but
Right.
they're like the other side of that coin is like they're really like soft and mushy and lovey on the inside, and they do like show it. It was
So
like really rewarding in that way. I honestly believe like the best way to control kids' behaviors in the classroom is to form personal connections with them.
yeah.
You're not gonna get into power struggles with them and win and then be like, "You know what? You're right." Like, you know, that's just not how it happens. Like, you have to get to know the kids in any school, but in those schools, like those some of those kids see more before they go to school in the morning than some people do in their whole life. You know what I
Right.
mean? So yeah, I started forming connections with the kids, and then I like became the cool teacher and everybody came to my room, and then like administration started giving me all the heavy hitters because they're like, "You can handle it. They
Oh,
love you."
wow.
So it was like eh, which was
Yeah.
like great and rewarding. That was like, you know, they love me, they respect me, but it was a lot. It was a lot for like my nervous system every day, all day.
What was the turning point for you? Like that first day of school that you mentioned, you're sobbing at the end of the day. How long did it take for you to think, oh, I think I'm actually doing this? Not only am I doing it, but I'm actually crushing it because these kids are loving me. If somebody's in this moment right now, I mean, how long did that take for you to kind of get acclimated there?
It probably took like the first couple months at least,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
like October, November, where I was like, all right, like I'm getting into like a flow. I'm like really like getting through to some of these kids. They're starting to like me. I just had to be true to myself and who I was and not try to pretend to be somebody else. And teaching middle school is a little bit like doing stand up. Like,
I would
you know what I mean?
imagine. Oh, yeah.
Except for it's like they all automatically don't like you. Like you're starting in the negative.
Just like stand up, honestly.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Especially if you're a woman, I'm sure.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, you kind of have to like win them over, you know, and like have a
Right.
personality, and so I had to do that. I had to kind of like work with them. Like, I'm cool, I promise. You
Yeah, okay,
know?
let's talk about that if you don't mind a little bit. How were you able to leverage that to get the kids kind of on your side? Did you kind of talk about like, look, I hated school too. Just do this and this and we'll be good. How did you kind of level with them and meet them where they're at?
Yeah, it was some of that. Like, yeah, I get it. I get that you guys hate this. You know, they would complain and I'd be like, yeah, I get it. Like, it
Yeah.
sucks. Math sucks. Like,
Right.
algebra sucks.
Right.
But, like, you know, I would try to help them see like the big picture. That was kind of like my goal the whole time, too, is because I think I didn't see the big picture. You know, like, I just was like, I need to get out of here and get a job. And so I wanted to try to help them see, like, yes, I know, I get it. It sucks. You will never, ever, ever need to find the slope of a line in your life.
Right.
Like, it
Right.
just won't happen. It won't come up.
Yeah.
And you need to learn it now. But big picture wise, you really want to like get through this and at least get your high school diploma so that you can, you know, have options moving forward. Like, you don't want to have to get a job and then be stuck in that job forever. Like, you know, I
Right.
just kind of help them do that. As far as like winning them over, joking with them, kind of like busting their chops here and there. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes. Yes.
and I would have personal conversations with them. If I had somebody who was really tough, I would be like, hey, can you stay after class or whatever? I would keep them after school. I would give them detentions, which like I hated doing that because when I was in school, I would get a detention and I'd be like, yeah, I'm not staying.
Mm.
Like, I'm not taking the late bus and walking a half mile home because you want me to stay after school. I'm just not doing it. I didn't like the idea of giving detentions, but it got to the point where like I had to, because I had to kind of show them that I was serious. And when they would stay for detention, I would only keep them for like 10 minutes. And in that 10 minutes, I would be like, what's up? You don't like this class? Are you just like, you having a hard time with it? You don't understand it? Do you need more help? You just don't like me? What's going on?
Yeah.
With these kids, who do you live with was always my first question. Who do you
Mm.
live with? My mom. So do you think mom wants me to call her and tell her that you don't know how to act in school? Now I know
Now,
what your weak spot is.
right,
You know what I
right.
mean? So when they would act up, it'd be like, do you think your dad wants to hear from me today? Or, and they'd be like, no, please, like,
Yeah.
or just having that conversation, like, what's up? And they'd be like, oh, no, it's not you. It's not the class. I don't know. And it was probably always something else going on. I had like one kid who just like was just thorn in my side. Finally, I talked to his mom, and she was like, yeah, his dad just left, and he keeps saying he's going to come pick him up, and he hasn't come. And it's not me. It's not my class. It's not
Right.
that. It's just, you got a lot going on,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
especially middle school, all that social stuff and just dealing with your own situation. So I
Absolutely.
think having an understanding for that, for me, sometimes they're going to have a bad day. Sometimes a kid's going to come in and he's going to like want to put his head down and not participate. And that has to be okay sometimes.
Yeah.
You have to kind of allow for them to have a bad day sometimes. He can't come in every day and put his head down and not participate. But if he's having a bad day, I'm not going to be like, come on, let's go,
Yeah.
um,
And that goes for
or
all
like,
of us. Yeah.
exactly. If we like can afford that for other people, we should be able to do that. Just because they're kids doesn't mean that they're suffering any less. So yeah, getting to know them was definitely my number one strategy and success for dealing with their behaviors. I mean, it was a double-edged sword, because part of that is like carrying that weight of their stories. Now you're the cool teacher, so now they want to tell you everything, which
Right.
that can be tough because you're a mandated reporter. So by law, if you tell me something that is something that I think is putting you in harm's way, I have
Right.
to report that. And that opens up a case. These kids get pulled out of their houses. Sometimes they don't want that. So it's like, it's a really fine line of, you're not their friends, obviously, but you are forming a connection and a bond with them. And so, yeah, trying to navigate that can be tricky too. Part of building connections for me too, I did the talent show every year I was there. So it was like this big
Oh,
production. So we had to stay after 3 days a week for 2 months, and then every 5 days a week for 2 weeks before the show, and then Friday night to do the show. And then I did the eighth grade dinner dance because nobody else wanted to do it. And it was awesome because I love party planning, and it was like so fun, and the kids had a great time. But I had to take time out of my life and my kid to like do that and plan it, go into their sports games. Like if they played basketball, if they played soccer, if they played volleyball, I would show up to their games, and they would know that you were there, and that makes a difference to like have somebody.
wow.
They know I was there because I was always yelling, but you know what I mean? Like
That's
that
really
makes a
sweet.
difference to the kids. So I genuinely cared about them. That made a difference. I still care about them. I always had food in my drawer. Like I always had big
Mm.
boxes of granola bars just in case they were hungry, because I didn't want them to be hungry, and they knew they could come to me. I always had like tampons and pads because the school didn't provide them. So the kids knew they could come to my room if they needed stuff like that. I wanted to be there for them in any way I could be there for them. And I think that's really like the important part of teaching.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds like you were a real safe space for them in so many different areas and ways, and that you really, when you were there, you gave it your all and went the extra many miles for these kids. So those are all incredible tips for people. How did you manage the fear or anxiety around not only the potential of students having altercations with each other, but these safety issues that go along with schools now and the threats and those tragedies? I mean, how in the world do you even start to navigate that?
Yeah, that was kind of like a major piece to getting into teaching. That was like, now that this is a thing, is
Mhm.
this really what I want to do? I remember my first year we did like the Alice training, which is like the active school shooting training.
Right.
And just doing the training alone is like enough to like rattle you, because it's like, what if this really did happen?
Yeah.
There was like one part of the training where it was like, if a kid is like like frozen in fear and is refusing to leave, like you have to leave them behind. It's like,
Oh my
what? Like, what
gosh.
the fuck? I can't. The training too is like, all right, so make sure your doors are closed and locked, which they always were. You have to cover your windows. So I had 2 doors in my room. So I had to like cover the windows. We had like these sticky things that it was like stuck to the side, and then you could just like put it over. We had like things we had to wrap around the hinges. So I had like a thing I had to wrap around the hinges, get all the kids in the corner in like the back of the room. It's like,
Oh my
how
gosh.
much time do you think I have? They're like, okay, keep them quiet. Like, all right, but there's going to be people having emotional reactions, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how am I going to keep these kids quiet? How am I going to protect them? What if there's a kid that went to the bathroom and she's on her way back and I know my door is locked? Do I open the door to let her in, or I just leave her out in the hallway?
Oh
Like,
my
you know what I mean?
gosh.
It's like you think all these
Yeah.
things. Like, I have an older son. He was in elementary school at the time. And like, I'm thinking, God, I hope his teacher is willing to do whatever it takes to save my son. So
Oh, yeah.
do I have to be willing to do whatever it takes to save these kids? Like, their parents are probably hoping that, I'm going to do the
Mhm.
same.
Oh my
It's
gosh.
like something that you don't even know how to process, and you just hope never happens,
Right.
basically. Well, our doors were always closed and locked. When I worked in inner cities, I found a big difference between the inner city schools that I worked in and the more rural schools that I've worked in as far as safety goes. When I was at the inner city school, our doors were closed and locked all the time. Mornings, like you could only get in one door. There was somebody there, inside the door. People could only get buzzed in, and then there was like a in between. Like, you get buzzed in this door, and then there's like another set of doors, and then you could like talk to the
Mm.
office there, but you'd have to get buzzed in again to like actually get into the school. I felt good about that. We didn't have metal detectors. They certainly had access to weapons. Like, I know that for a fact. But when I was working in the more rural school, I just started noticing things where it was like, I would see people get buzzed in and they wouldn't even like ask them, like, why are you here? What do you need? It would be like somebody would ring the bell and they wouldn't even look, they would just buzz them. Watching this go down, like, that's not good. And then there
Right.
would be like doors unlocked in the morning. Like, all the doors are just like open and unlocked. Like, okay, well, anybody can just come in. The doors inside, like the classroom doors, were always like open and unlocked. And then I don't even know how it got brought up, but one day we were talking about something, and one of the counselors said, "Oh, we're so lucky. We're so lucky to live where we live." Like, saying like that would never happen here. And it just like
Oh
really,
boy.
really bothered me, because I read a stat, and in 2018, the AP reported that 10 of the deadliest shootings, 9 of them were in towns of populations less than 75,000 people, and most of them were in towns of populations of less than 50,000 people. It's not uncommon for these things to happen in small towns. And I know for a fact that those kids have access to guns as well. For him to say that, it just like really threw me, because it was like, so is that how everybody around here feels and nobody's really taking this seriously? Because that's scary for me. I felt safer in the inner city schools.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Was there ever an instance where you mentioned that, teachers are mandated reporters. Was there ever an instance where you had to file a report, anything along those lines?
Yeah, there was one girl came in one day and was like having a bad day, and I was like, "What's up?" And she was like telling me about how her dad was like chasing her mom with a hammer, and then her mom threw bleach in her dad's face. This like all happened before school this
Oh
day,
my
like
gosh,
this
yeah.
morning. And some other things, and I was like, "Okay." And I would tell them like, "Be careful what you tell me. I have to report certain
Right,
things. So, I just want you to know that before you tell me anything."
right.
Um, and so, yeah, I had to like go to the counselor and be like, "This is what she told me," and then they would file the paperwork. But that's
Yeah.
like so tough too, because it's like you're protecting the kids, you're doing the right thing for the kids because you're getting them out of a scary or unsafe environment. At the
Right.
same time, like these kids are getting pulled out of their houses and put in group homes or whatever.
Right.
And some of them don't want that. Some of them don't want these like cases opened against their families because once the case is open, then that family's kind of like on the radar. So it's like you're trying to do what's best for the kid. You're trying to keep them safe. You want to keep them like emotionally stable and,
Yeah. Seems like in a lot of cases you're in a lose-lose position and you're trying
yeah.
to make the best decision. Yeah, you'd hope that they would be pulled from an environment that's not very safe into a safer one, but we also don't know how the group home is or the foster care system is where they're at, or I can't even imagine the weight of the world is on teachers' shoulders with how things are set up today. What was the point of burnout that you hit where you're like, you know what, I can't do this shit anymore?
Yeah, so I did it for 2 years, and then when I came back for my 3rd year, the thing is like I was teaching a computer class. I had 21, 22 computers. I had classes of 35 kids. On like a great day, 18 of the computers would be working. So I had to have kids
Mm.
like working together, trying to manage everything without having the right resources to do it. So trying
Right.
to just piece it together and make the best of what you got. And then when I came back the 3rd year, the kids were getting laptops. I had to assign them numbers because I need to know who has what because some kids will break stuff. And then by the time we get like signed in doing something, all right, now it's time to like put them all back and make sure they're all like from the right people and plugged in. And doing that, I did that, I don't know, for like a couple weeks. And then just like dealing with their behaviors again, it's like I just couldn't. My nervous system was shot just being like, you're just constantly like on edge, constantly
Right.
being vigilant of what's going on, trying to pay attention to what 35 kids are doing at once and manage that and like yell. You have to yell all day because they're so loud that if you don't yell, they're not going to hear you. So it's like you're just yelling all day. You leave exhausted. One of my coworkers was like, "Listen, it's gangster rap on the way in and nothing on the way home." I'm like, yeah.
Another hot tip.
Yeah, that worked for a
Nice.
while. I had so much other stuff going on too in my life that I hadn't allowed myself to like even turn around and look at or face in any capacity for a very long time. So I feel like it was all building. Like I went through a divorce in between like those 2 years, and I would be getting ready for work, and I would have the news on, and it would be like, "Oh, there was a shooting, like a deadly shooting in the city last night," and I would be like, "Please don't let that be one of my kids. Please don't let that be one of my kids." Like
Mm.
I don't think I could have handled that. And yeah, those are things that you have to think about during the day. Everything was just like building to this big bubble. And yeah,
Yeah.
it was like I came in one day, the kids were just like acting up. The Chromebooks, like half of them weren't plugged in. So they were like dead. I didn't have computers for them to use. And it was just like, I can't do this. I started feeling like I was like having like an irregular heartbeat. Like my heart was like
Oh
skipping a beat,
gosh.
constantly like taking my pulse. Like I feel like my heart's like double beating like for like a week. And then I went in that day and all that stuff was happening and I like felt like my heart was like just skipping a beat and I was like, I gotta go. And I like went to the emergency room and I was like, I think I'm like having a heart attack.
Oh
I don't
my
know, like my heart's
gosh.
like not beating right. And they were like, no, you're having a panic attack, like you're fine, your heart's fine. But it's like I had
Wow.
panic attacks before where it was like, tunnel vision, like, oh my God, I'm gonna pass out. There was none of that. It was just my heartbeat, like, just felt like it's not right. There's something not right. It's racing. And yeah, they were like, nope, it's anxiety. And so I was like, you know what? I need to take a step back from this. So I just like took my sick time, which was like 2 weeks to kind of like
Yeah.
think about it and figure out like what I wanted to do. And towards the end, like that year, it had gotten to the point where like I would be driving in and I would just like start bawling, crying because I'm like, I don't know how I'm gonna do this. Like I would just be like thinking through the day, like how am I gonna get through the day? How am I gonna do this? How am I gonna deal with these kids? And I had just like worked myself up so much that like I would just start crying. And And yeah, and then it got to that point in the ER, and I was like, you know what? I think I just need to stop. And that was hard because it
Yeah.
was like I had so much guilt because I had formed relationships with these kids, and they were like, when are you coming back? Where are you? When are you coming back? I can't. I can't. And I had so much shame because it was like, yeah, it's a lot, but people do it every day. There were still people, I had coworkers who had been doing it and are still doing it. So it was like, why can't you? It was
Mm.
a
Yeah.
lot of like working through like, what's wrong with you? Why can't you handle this? Why can't you do this? This is what you wanted to do, and now you can't. And trying to like work through kind of just forgiving myself and accepting that it's okay if other people can do things that I can't do. For me to like look at them and be like, well, they're still there and they're still doing it. Like, why can't you? Why can't you? But I just couldn't.
Mm.
Like, I feel like I
Right.
couldn't. I physically could not even force myself to go because it was like a block. Like, just it was too much for me.
Right. Kind of what was going on with the kids is like you never know what's going on at home, right? You also never know what's going on at home with your colleagues and other teachers too. You could be dealing with something that's draining you in your home life, and maybe you're starting at a 9 every day and you're getting to the 10 really quickly, and there might be starting at a 2 or a 3. And so just having that grace for yourself. Did you take a break from everything? Did you go and get a different job? Did you transfer to a different school? What was the next steps that you took?
Yeah, so I ended up going and getting another job at like a smaller rural school where I was doing like a sub-separate behavior program. So it was kids that
Mhm.
didn't go to class, they only stayed with us all day because of like their behaviors. And then COVID hit. And then I was just like teaching from home, which was basically like a lot of just posting assignments, and I wasn't really doing live classes. So that was easy enough for the rest of the year. But that was like when I really like discovered podcasts, because then I started walking during the day
Yeah.
because I had the time, and I like discovered podcasts and started listening to them. And first I was like listening to like Dak Shepard, like the
Armchair
armchair
expert.
expert.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And Pete Holmes, like You Made It Weird.
Mm-hmm.
And him and like his wife do another one. And it sounds like a bad best man speech, but I really feel like it like saved my life in a way
Yeah.
because they both talked about being sober and not drinking, and listening to them talk about it, and I was like, they're in Hollywood. Like, Dak Shepard is married to Kristen Bell. Like, he has to go to like these Hollywood premieres and stuff. Like, if he can do that sober, I can go to like the family cookout sober. So
I love
then
it.
I like quit drinking, and then I was really like getting to know myself and like figuring stuff out. And I feel like I'm still kind of, picking up the pieces and trying to figure it out. So I did that thing. I did the online thing, COVID. And then when everybody decided to go back face to face for COVID, that was when I was like, you know what? I don't think I'm going to do that. I think I'm just going to take some time off. I worked at like a grocery store for a little bit just to like make
Mhm.
some money.
Yeah.
And that was kind of hard too. Like, you have these college degrees, you spent all that money all this time, and now you're like making minimum wage, working at a grocery store. What are you doing? Like, so after going through everything I went through, like not feeling like I could go to college, then going to college for culinary, doing that and being like, okay, this isn't for me. And then getting the courage to go again and to go for a 4-year degree, having to do all the financial aid stuff again, apply, having to transfer to a university, like all that stuff I did, and take 3 state licensure exams to get where I was.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
then to be like, okay, I'm just going to walk away from this. Like, it felt like a failure on so many levels, like it felt like a failure to myself. I felt like I was failing the administration. I felt like I was failing the kids. It was like devastating to make that choice. Like, I don't think this is for me. Just trying to like find my value and my worth and not have it all connected to what I was doing or what I was making, or like that was really hard,
Yeah.
to figure out. I actually took a job doing like a para position 2 years ago, and I started doing that, and then I got pregnant unexpectedly,
Oh, okay.
expectedly. um We had been like trying for years, and I was older, and I was like about to turn 41, and I was like, all right, if I didn't get pregnant when I was
Wow.
37 or 38 or 39, I'm definitely not going to get pregnant when I'm 40. And the
And
universe
then
was
you
like,
did.
haha, fuck you. I do what I want.
Oh my
And I was like, all
gosh.
right. I started subbing because I had like all the doctor's appointments. And so
Awesome. So where are you at now?
well, I have one son who's 15 in high school, and I
Wow.
have one who just turned 1, busy and trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I make money? Because I have to make money. Because if I'm not making money, then what good am I? And it's like, dude,
Mm.
you're busy all day. You're like doing all the shopping, all the cooking, all the cleaning, all the laundry, all of this. But still, there's a part of me that's like, yeah, but I need to get a job.
Oh gosh, it is, isn't it so hard how we are taught that our self-worth is directly connected to how we make money and what that title is.
Yeah, it's hard because through getting sober and doing some healing and all that, I've definitely been like, all right, it's okay that you can't do what everybody else does, like,
Mm.
because I'll say, like, okay, it's so much, but people do it, people are doing it. But then it's like, yes, but you aren't people. You are
Mhm.
you. So there are going to be some things that you can do that other people can't, and vice versa. Like trying to,
Right.
come to terms with that idea. Some days, it's harder than others, like, especially with working with the kids, because the reason why I even started the whole journey of being a teacher was like, I really wanted to do something meaningful and make a
Yeah.
difference, and I guess walking away from that feels like I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able to do something meaningful or make a difference. So that feels like a failure to me. Then I'm
Wow.
like, maybe you can find a way to, like, make a difference in another way. Maybe that's not teaching in that capacity.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, so that's kind of like in my way of thinking now, is like, how
Right.
can I use all of the things that I've learned and all of the training that I've had? But I'm like, I don't even know where to start. And I'm like afraid to try anything because
Mm.
everything I try, I'm like, nah. And
Mm.
then it's like, well, you're just wasting time and money. Like, just pick something and do it. So
Mm.
I go back and forth.
Yeah, everybody kind of gets in their groove at different times in their life too. Your career isn't over yet, your life isn't over yet. You have no idea what's coming up for you or what's ahead, and that's okay.
Yeah,
Like I think we can really be hard on ourselves when we can't figure out exactly what we want to do and then do it for the rest of our life. We're ever changing, ever evolving. You wouldn't ask a kid to be like, okay, pick a toy, and that's the only thing you can have and play with for the rest of your life.
I
And
know.
we're no different, right? So I think it's really cool that you have this variety of experience and you're going to be able to bring that to whatever you want to do next. And if you also don't want to do anything like that, that's also okay. If you're able to take care of your family and that makes you happy, I think we got to stop being so hard on ourselves.
I know.
What have you learned about yourself through all this whole process of trying things and making different pivots? And all, by the way, it sounds like you pivot successfully every time, and that is no small feat either. That takes a whole skill set. So yeah, anything that you've learned about yourself.
Through the healing process, like from the teaching thing, like just realizing, like, okay, you are just in constant fight or flight. Your nervous system is not built for this. Like, you have things that you haven't dealt with yet that are still, you're still working out, and that's okay. And that's a part of you, and that's a piece of you. And so jobs like cooking, where people are screaming at you and like, come on, fast,
Mhm.
let's go, or teaching where there's just so much happening and kids are getting up and moving and this kid's doing that and then the phone's ringing and like this, it's like,
Right.
okay, that just might be too much for you, and that's okay. So figuring out, like, okay, what can you work with, what feels good for you, what feels right for you, because I feel like with jobs like that, I would get up and it would just, like, the idea of going was almost too much, and
Yeah.
then thinking like, okay, I have to do this every single day and I have to get up and I would like just get really far ahead of myself, like, I'm not going to be able to do this, there's no way. So like, okay, well, what would you feel comfortable with? What can you do? What and trying to just figure out like what works for you. That's why I think something more creative and artistic, and then you get like that whole thing like, yeah, I love to write and I love to do this, but like, how am I going to make a career out of that? Where do I even start?
Mhm. Yeah.
So it's like, all right, well, be realistic, get a job at the grocery store, and,
Mm.
like trying to find like the in between of like, where do I fit? Where am I going to feel fulfilled? Where am I going to feel like I'm going to be able to make a difference, but I'm not going to be sacrificing my own well being to try to make that difference for other people?
Right. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It can be kind of everything at once. I know that I took a job in a call center when I realized I got to get the heck out of stand-up comedy. I hate this lifestyle. And that's where my friends and I started this podcast. That's the same time. That's where I started my first business. And I was working in a call center all day. And I'm like, this is working great because I don't really have to think about where my next paycheck is coming. And it frees up this mental space for creativity. And so, yeah, we just have to be like kind to ourselves through that evolution too. And the jobs that you've mentioned, I mean, they are such high stress demanding jobs, right? And it's not, Jessica, it's not like you said, listen, they were paying me $1 million a year. I had to answer one phone call a day, and then the rest of the time I got massaged, and
I just couldn't do it.
I just couldn't do it. Everything that you described would put anybody on edge. So I think you're a badass for doing all of that.
After one of my favorite M terms on your podcast was having a renaissance,
Yes.
was like, that was something
Fun.
I
Gotta
went
love
through
that.
too, like after,
Yeah.
because you do have people in your life that are like, hustle, hustle, grind, grind, grind. And you're like, and they're like, well,
Right.
what are you doing? What are you doing? Where are you working? What do you, it's just all about like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And it's like, but
Mhm.
I'm going for a walk in the woods with my dog, like,
Yeah.
and so you kind of like start figuring out like, all right, I don't think we see the world the same
Right.
way anymore. Like I don't feel like that's the most important thing to me.
Right.
That was part of it too, is who in my life is really down to support me, even if I want to do something different or be different or.
Absolutely. Are you enjoying the work that you're doing now, like around the home or, the things that you mentioned? And or are you even allowing yourself to enjoy it because of that guilt that you said creeps in? Tell us about that experience.
It's nice for me that I have a 15-year-old, so I've done it before, and now
Yeah.
to have a 1-year-old where I have that perspective where I can be like, it goes by fast. I know this is going to go by fast. These are all just
Yeah.
like passing phases. So the first time around, it's like, oh my God, it feels like they're going to be like this forever. I can't do this toddler thing. It's terrible. But like when you're doing it the second time, you're like, oh, it's so cute. Like, look at him saying no and throwing a fit. Like, because you just like know that it goes by so fast, and
Right.
so you can like sit back and kind of appreciate it even on the rough days. So I do appreciate, like, I love being home and doing all the stuff around the house, and like I am using my culinary degree.
Yeah,
uh,
I bet.
Technically I do use that 6 days a week. um
And teaching
yeah,
and
exactly.
organization
I know,
and
and
all the things.
yoga. Yeah, if I could just get paid to be a mom, if we could all just get paid to be mom. So I do sort of still beat myself up like, yep, you're doing all the things and you're very busy, but also, you need to have an income, because I'm lucky enough where my boyfriend makes enough money where we can pay our bills and we can get by, and I don't have to
Yeah.
have a job, but it's tight, you know what I mean? Like, and if I did have a job, like we could do more and we could have more. So I definitely like think about that sometimes, like, well, you could just work on the weekends, and because he works
Mm.
all week. So it's like, how are you going to go to work? I'm not going to pay for daycare. Then I might as well just not work because it's so
Right.
expensive. It's like, what's the
Right.
point? So it's like, well, you can just work on the weekends when he's not working. And then I'm just like, I'm gonna be so tired. I'm already so tired. Like,
Right.
but then I'm like, well, I have other friends who have 3 kids and work 2 jobs, and like I'm kind of back in that like comparing myself
Wow.
to other people
Right, exactly. Yeah, that comparison trap. It's like our biggest enemy and we're doing it to ourselves. Thanks for sharing all of this, Jessica. If somebody is tuning in right now and they're maybe in a similar situation to where you were, maybe they're an educator or something similar and they're really having a hard time in that position, they don't think it's for them. Is there anything that you would want to tell them or maybe what you would have wish somebody would have told you at that point?
If it's like something that's really not for you, I think that it's okay to give yourself permission to walk away if you're in a position to be able to do that. But again, if you're just struggling with behaviors and the kids, which trust me, I know it's hard. And we haven't even talked about phones. We haven't even
Oh
mentioned cell
gosh.
phones
Right.
and the idea of being recorded when you don't even know you're being recorded, you know?
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
but
Right.
yeah, but if that's what you're struggling with, the behavior piece, like build connections with the kids, do whatever you have to do. Building those connections with the kids, that is like your number one way of like handling behavior issues because you never know what's going on with these kids in their lives. And you can't judge a kid by their behavior because there's always something underneath the surface kind of
Mm.
causing that behavior, you know?
Right,
And
right.
kind of like learning to have that patience and understanding for them and trying to get to know them as people.
And then I'd imagine at the start of every new year, it's like, okay, got to figure out all these new kids and what makes
All these
them
new
tick. So it
personalities.
like,
Yeah.
woo, and it starts over and new connections and new personal relationships.
Can I ask you a
Yeah.
question
Yeah.
real quick?
Oh, feel
All
free.
right.
Yes.
Being a history major, I am like
Yeah.
fascinated with kind of like the history of religion, and I'm interested in what motivated you to choose to major in religious studies. Did you grow up
Ooh.
religious? Did you consider teaching?
Yeah, I grew up in one household, it was Christian, and one household, it was Catholic, but not big into like, nobody really practiced things. We didn't go to church very often or anything like that. But when I was a freshman in college, I took this, oh my gosh, it was called Teachings of Jesus class. It was a religious studies class. And it was all about the history and what was going on at the time that Jesus was alive and all of this stuff. And I absolutely fell in love with it. I was so fascinated and also made me think, why did it take me 18 years to learn about the history and just the state of the world and stuff about this person who these religions are, connected to? That also blew my mind open.
Mm,
And so I absolutely loved that class. And then from there, I was like, I'm just going to take other classes like this that pique my interest. So then, I mean, I took Jainism and Taoism and Judaism and Islam and I mean, Zoroastrianism. I just took all the different religions of the world and I just loved it. And I actually went
mhm,
into school as an art major thinking, okay, well, I like to paint and things like that. So maybe I'll do art. And I switched because I just I just realized I like to paint in my free time. I don't really want to study the theory of art and all of that kind of stuff. And
mm.
so I was undeclared until almost the year before graduation, and I sat down with a guidance counselor and they're like, "So you have to pick a major and you have a lot of religious studies units. Do you want to just do that?" And I was like, "Oh, I didn't even know that was an option." So yeah, that sounds good. So I was just taking classes that I enjoyed and ended up being enough to major in religious studies. And I ended up writing a senior thesis on the historical Jesus. So for full circle moment from my freshman year with the same teacher who taught that class was like my supervisor for it. And she is an incredible person, an archaeologist and historian and digs up churches in Turkey. I was just so
Wow.
mesmerized by her life. Yeah, I mean, I asked my professors, what do people do with this type of religious studies degree? And a lot of them go on to teach, become a professor,
Mm,
something like that. And then a lot of people go to law school and like do religious law or something.
mhm.
Oh, maybe I'll teach at some point. And then I started doing stand up and really fell in love with that. I guess I'm gonna do this. Don't know what I'm gonna do with this degree, but I enjoyed my college experience because I just took classes that were fascinating. And I remember telling my Punjabi professor because I also took that class too and learned that language. And I said, "Yeah, I'm actually going to try stand up comedy." And he was so confused. He had never heard. He didn't know what that was. he thought, it's like, okay, well, have fun with the theater, I guess. So people were very confused by me, for sure.
Yeah, were your parents like, "What the hell are you doing?"
Yeah, like, we're not surprised by anything that you do now. And then very quickly it was like, now you paint penises on coffee mugs.
Yeah, just don't bring that stuff to
Yeah,
Christmas, all right, Delaney?
my gosh, what a great example too of like the impact that teachers can have. I mean, I
Mm,
fell in love with that class and it changed my entire trajectory for what I studied. And also I think that absolutely influenced my work going forward. I think learning about other cultures opened my world up so much, increased my empathy and compassion and understanding of like, oh, that person is doing that because that's part of their religious practice that somebody might dismiss as something else. One teacher can absolutely change everything
yeah.
for you. Thank you again to Jessica for being so candid in today's episode. And I actually want to give a shout out to the professor I mentioned, Dr. Christine Thomas over at UC Santa Barbara, who made a big impact on me by just cracking my mind wide open when I was 18. So, any gauchos out there who may be tuning in, try to take a class with her before you graduate. You will not regret it. And then just wrapping up with the Apple Podcast review of the episode. This is from Monty257, and it says, my daily routine. I started listening to your podcast about a month ago when I was searching for something more relatable for self-help topics. I'm so happy I stumbled upon your podcast. It's been my inspiration every day to be my better self. Monty, thank you so much. It's so cool to hear that this podcast is part of your daily routine. I mean, truly freaking honored over here to hear that. And I appreciate you taking the time. I'm so glad you found it. And if you want to leave an Apple Podcast review, I'll be able to read it on the next episode. I'll personally be able to say hello and thank you and, tell you that you're super awesome and stuff. So feel free to check that out on your Apple Podcast app. And just a heads up for those of you who are new to tuning into Self-Helpless, and a reminder for those that have been around for a while, I have an email list that is completely free to join. You can find it at my website, delaniefischer.com. And I like sharing different resources and, media and gig opportunities for creatives, multi-hyphenates, those of you who might be amidst a pivot or transition of some kind. So feel free to join us if you like. You can click the episode's description as well to find the link. And my email list subscribers, they get informed about cool stuff that I'm just not able to share about on the podcast because there's often a quicker turnaround time by the time I record the next episode of the podcast. Just a heads up on that. Yeah, check it out. It's called the D List. All right, everybody. I hope you take care of yourself and prevent hitting that wall of burnout if you can. Take less responsibilities on if you're able to, and just give yourself permission to, do less, enjoy more. I will talk to you soon. Thank you for tuning in to Self-Helpless. You can find our brand new merch, Patreon community, and other fun goodies at selfhelplesspodcast.com. We'd be thrilled if you left an Apple Podcast review, shared this episode with a friend, or post about it on Instagram and tag us at Self-Helpless Podcast so we could repost you and say hi. As an independently produced show, we sincerely appreciate your support. Thanks, everybody.